Hello everyone, and welcome to the next edition of Healthy Living with Emerson Hospital. Today I'm very pleased to introduce and welcome Brenda McCurdy. She's a nurse educator in the emergency department at Emerson Hospital. Welcome, Brenda.
Thanks for having me, Leah.
Absolutely. And this must be feeling like you're back home. I know you were born and raised in Littleton. And
yes, it's great to be back with the community.
Terrific. Great. So I know one of the many programs that you do at Emerson through the emergency department is trainings for lots of different things to keep people healthy and in the event when something goes awry having to do with people's health. The focus today that we're going to talk about is on Stop the Bleed, which is an educational program to help train people in the event of a mass emergency. Is that right?
Correct. It's Stop the Bleed is the training program, and it's training people how to handle life-threatening bleeding and try and help save a life.
Great, and I know that that's a main focus for everybody in the emergency department at Emerson, so it's great that you're directly involved with that. So how did Stop the Bleed come into being? Is this a national program, or what is this?
So it's a national program. It came to be after the tragedy in Sandy Hook. When they went back and looked at that event, they felt that perhaps if there had been tourniquets available and people who knew how to use them, that there would have been much less loss of life. So they decided to form a group, the Hartford Consensus, and they partnered with the American College of Surgeons and came up with training that they could give to the public, people with non-medical backgrounds, and train them on different techniques to stop the bleeding, including tourniquet use, and then sort of a national campaign to train people but also make them readily available.
Interesting. And where are tourniquets now in day-to-day life? We see a lot of defibrillators in public spaces, airports, grocery stores, schools, which is great. I think that's been going on for 15 or 20 years now. So where are these tourniquets in public spaces?
So defibrillator use has become sort of the standard. So what a lot of organizations are doing is putting the Stop the Bleed kits with the tourniquets. So for instance, Gillette Stadium trained all of their staff and put tourniquets with all of the defibrillators, and we're working towards that at Emerson. We have some available and are completing that, so it will be available with every defibrillator on the campus so that most people know where to find a defibrillator. So it just makes sense that we would put the bleeding kit there.
Okay, good. And if there is no tourniquet, and if a mass incident or even a singular incident like a car crash where somebody is bleeding profusely, if no tourniquet is available, can you talk a little bit about perhaps articles of clothing or other things that may be able to take the place of a tourniquet to help stop the bleed?
Sure. So the reason that the tourniquets are so effective, a lot of that training and research came from our military, where they obviously have a lot of opportunity to use things such as that, and they've done a lot of research, and the tourniquets are incredibly effective. If you don't have one, the bleeding control training talks about other ways that you can stop bleeding, or if it's in an area that a tourniquet isn't effective, say a neck wound or a torso wound. So what we would start with recommending, because there's so much variation in the fabrics and how much give they have, is people who attend the class get taught how to pack the wound and then to apply direct pressure. If there's additional articles of clothing in other people, then you can try and make a tourniquet, but they're going to be less effective than the commercially factored ones. But certainly if you have no other option, it's better than nothing. But we would have you start with doing the packing and the pressure. Articles of clothing that don't have a lot of stretch in them would make the best substitute. A lot of the fabrics have given them. That's what people are looking for these days. But things like maybe a leather belt or something with Velcro, something that's not going to stretch as much, would be the next best alternative.
Okay. Those might be a little bit more readily available than a tourniquet in some instances. Okay, great. And how old do you recommend people be in order to go through the training program?
I don't know that there's a specific age recommendation. The training is pretty straightforward, simple, easy to understand. So I think it's sort of, what people are comfortable with. Certainly teenagers are plenty old to do this. We did do some training at the health fair in May, just sort of a table where people came up and we just did a really quick training. And we had people of all ages that we were able to train on how to use a tourniquet in a short amount of time. So it's sort of up to the individual, but it's not something that's complicated. I have a 10-year-old at home, and I showed her how to use that the other day, and she picked it up really fast.
Great. I would think the more people train, the better.
Absolutely. Yep.
Good. Is there anything else that you'd like to share about the Stop the Bleed trainings? I know we occasionally do them for the community at Emerson Hospital, and we're going to be looking into doing some in 2019.
Yeah, I think it's incredibly important training. Already in the United States this year, there's been over 300 mass shootings, and I think every week we turn on the television and you see another incident where this type of training could make the difference between life and death. So I think I would encourage people to do the training. From doing the trainings, a lot of people come in and are like, I couldn't do this, I wouldn't know what to do. And it's really exciting for me because they leave feeling like they have a new skill that they can do. It's very easy. It's designed for people with no medical background, so you don't have to have any sort of medical training to learn how to do this. And none of us like to feel helpless in a horrific situation or in general. And this training really is an opportunity for people to make a big impact and perhaps save a life. So I would encourage people to take advantage of the training.
And in the event that the training is needed in a situation, would somebody or people who have gone through the training raise their hand and say, I've been trained in this, or do they carry a card around? How would one know that they've been officially trained?
Right. There's official training. We'll give out a certificate if people do the full course, but I think it's, much like CPR, whoever's around, speak up, and the most qualified person should be doing the actions, but certainly it's nice if there's more than one person to help there. So even if you've been trained and there's somebody there that maybe is a nurse or is a doctor or a firefighter, EMT, paramedic, somebody like that, you can make the phone calls or help explain things or get materials. So, certainly I think it's just like any other thing where people self-identify that they've been trained in this.
Okay. That's great. So if the community is interested in going through the formal training program at Emerson, we encourage you to send an email, please, to PR, that's short for public relations, at Emerson Hosp, that's EMersonHosp.org, and we will be in touch with you. So should we go over to the Littleton Fire Department and watch a simulated training?
That sounds great.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Brenda, and thank you for all the amazing work that you're doing for the community.
Thanks, Leah. Thanks for having me.
Great.
Thank you, Leah. Getting help from an immediate responder can stop bleeding and save a life. So right now, why don't we go to the Littleton Fire Station and see a staged demonstration with that in mind. Dr. Allan Kuong from Emerson Hospital and Stevie LeBlanc, Littleton firefighter and paramedic, will show us how it's done.
Good afternoon. My name is Allan Kuong, and what we're going to do with Stevie, demonstrate the hemorrhage control principles for the Stop the Bleed campaign. As we all know, hemorrhage is one of the leading causes of preventable death, and something that first responders and lay citizens can use to stave off bleeding with simple bleeding control measures, which we'll demonstrate. Stevie's going to be demonstrating the proper use of the tourniquet on our mannequin here. Now, several disclaimers. Number one, first you have to make sure that the scene is safe for yourself. And number two, that you're actually taking protective measures such as wearing gloves and protective equipment so you don't get blood exposures. Now, for today's demonstration, we will not be wearing gloves for demonstration purposes so that we can show the techniques more clearly. The use of tourniquets is very important, especially for extremity bleeding, because one can bleed out within 3 minutes without proper treatment. So what we're going to show is the proper use of the tourniquets to stave off bleeding. Ideally, we would like to have this tourniquet applied within 30 seconds, and then we're going to reassess. So Stevie will now show the proper use of the tourniquet, which we have here. Now, one other thing is that this tourniquet, after we've used this, we cannot use this again on a live patient. Once it's been used, this is only for practice only. And also emphasize that you need to get proper training. Okay, Stevie's going to demonstrate the tourniquet, but she's also going to explain some of the pearls and pitfalls for not using the proper tourniquet. Stevie?
So if you do not have a tourniquet on you and you come across someone that is bleeding and they do need help, we suggest that you apply direct pressure with some sort of cloth that you have, or a towel, or anything you can find to put some direct pressure on it. Granted, it should be something clean. If you do not have this on you, if you do have a tourniquet on you, this should be your first line of use for bleeding.
Okay, what we're going to be going over is the utilization of the tourniquet. And the tourniquet, again, is not third line anymore. It's used primarily for extreme hemorrhage control, particularly for extremities, meaning the upper extremities, the arms, or the lower extremities, the legs. This is something that we need to apply ideally within 30 seconds because people can exsanguinate or bleed to death, literally. So Stevie's going to demonstrate the tourniquet where we want to apply this to the affected limb and affect hemorrhage control above the wound. And we're going to apply this very quickly and securely. Okay, now Stevie is applying pressure by turning the windlass in either direction until it's tight and bleeding has stopped. And when it's properly applied, this will actually hurt very significantly. But now she has secured the strap. And after she's secured the tourniquet, she's going to look to see if there's any further bleeding, and then feel for a pulse, which there should be none if it's properly applied. Once this has been determined, but there's still further bleeding, she's going to apply another tourniquet right next to that tourniquet for additional bleeding control and reassess.
So if there is a wound that is bleeding in a spot that cannot have a tourniquet applied as such an arm or a leg, you are going to put direct pressure on the wound to try and stop the bleeding, or you can pack it with some gauze if you do have that readily available. So if there is a wound that is bleeding and you are not able to apply a tourniquet to it, you're going to use gauze or some sort of towel to try and apply direct pressure. You're going to identify where they are bleeding. You can pack this into the wound and then push with direct pressure to try and get the bleeding to stop. So in summary, if you see someone that is in need and they are bleeding, first off, make sure your scene is safe. You don't want to put yourself in harm and get injured as well. You're going to make sure you have safety precautions such as gloves, or a mask if you feel the need. If you see the bleed on an arm or a leg, a tourniquet is your first line. If you don't have a tourniquet or the wound is somewhere on the body that you cannot apply a tourniquet, do some direct pressure with some gauze or a cloth.
And in summary, this is very important what Stevie just said, just to make sure that you have the proper training, the proper equipment, and that you remain safe.
Thank you, Dr. Kuong and Stevie. Now, if you would like to do the actual Stop the Bleeding training at Emerson Hospital, please email pr@emersonhosp.org. So for Leah and myself, thank you for watching. We'll see you next time on Healthy Living with Emerson Hospital.